Today, the 25th of May, Africa commemorates African Freedom Day. So it's a happy African Freedom Day to all the Africans. The big question that is to be asked is, has Africa really attained her freedom? Where does this day come from? What led to the Africans begin to celebrate or to commemorate this day? In one of the famous statements by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the first Prime Minister of Ghana, stated that Ghana's independence means nothing if the rest of Africa is not independent. This was a paramount statement that just expressed the mind and vision of the Pan-African leader he was, and also the kind of vision and dream that the freedom fighters had. To achieve this freedom, they had to sacrifice. Blood had to be shed for the Africans to attain the freedom. Hence, it's worthwhile to celebrate this day. So history tells us that in 1958, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, with 8 representatives from 8 independent states, convened at the first Congress in Accra, Ghana. One of the key things they discussed was to come up with a day when they could begin to celebrate or to commemorate the freedom that was being attained progressively. At the center of this commemoration is the determination of strife by some of the gallant African leaders and other fellow Africans, the so-called freedom fighters, who made sure that they fought exploitation, they fought dominance, they fought any kind of injustice from the colonial masters. Hence, Africa recognizes the efforts of gallant leaders like Patrice Lumumba, Dr. David Kenneth Kaunda, Jomo Kenyatta, Thomas Sankara, Julius Nyerere, Dedan Kimathi, Nelson Mandela, Ben Bella, and many others who sweated to see to it that Africa attained her independence. What drove these men to the point or to an extent of dying or shedding blood? Shedding blood for people they never knew. People went to that extent because these people had a dream. These people knew the importance of freedom. These people had a vision for the particular countries as well as the continent. They knew that by attaining freedom, they would be free to be able to come up with laws that were fair, laws that would be inclusive, laws that would allow each and every person to benefit from the proceeds of the natural resources or the wealth that belonged to the particular countries where people were born and bred. These people knew that with freedom, they would be able to choose leaders other than leaders who would be imposed on them. They wanted to be in control. They wanted to have the fate of their country in their hands for them to be able to govern themselves. Africa is caught up in the paradox of rich but poor, huge but weak. Why these paradoxes, or why the paradox of being rich but poor? Although we may commit the fallacy of generalization, however, there are some parts of Africa that are really doing fine and they are progressing politically, economically, and socially. However, the common struggle of Africa of being rich but poor can be seen from the perspective of what the problem is. The bigger problem that threatens Africa is not the Western world. The bigger problem that threatens Africa is not the Chinese, but the bigger problem that Africa faces is the greed from her own people, the greed from people who have influence and power, the learned people of Africa. Why this category of people? Because these are the people who are supposed to bring the dream of the Pan-Africanists, the dream of the freedom fighters to actualization. But instead, the majority have been in forefront in thwarting this dream. Well, this category consists of people who have been charged with the task of presiding over the political and economic affairs of particular countries. Why greed? This has been evident in a lot of billions that are being shipped or that are shipped annually from the continent. They say Africa loses about $50 billion annually to tax havens in powerful countries that have got lower rates of tax. With the help of Africans themselves, large corporations keep on amassing large profits, and yet they avoid to pay tax. These people fail to take up the corporate responsibility, so that look at the infrastructure in most of the countries. One can argue to say yes, there is infrastructure development. That one cannot be denied. However, what is the cost of most of these projects? There is a lot of public suspicion for most of the projects that are being carried out. The same large corporations tend to employ people on slave conditions. People work for long periods of hours and they are paid peanuts, or they are paid peanuts to enslave them for the rest of their lives, so that the quality of life, even when they are working, it does not improve. It leaves them in that particular class. Africans continue killing each other in the strive for power. People want to have political power to dominate, political power for prestige, political power for suppression of one group or another. Africans doing that to fellow Africans. This brings about the fragmentation of the continent from one country to another. What can change this? The vision and dream of the Pan-Africanists was to see to it that Africa becomes united, Africa becomes one in terms of the political and economic emancipation. So what will change this? They implore or they call to the conscience of the political leaders and the learned Africans, the elites from all over the world, that they are the ones who can develop Africa. The cherishing of our philosophy and the rich traditions and heritage. The call to Ubuntu. The political leaders shouldn't just be appealing to this philosophy when they want votes from their people, or when they want something from their people. That's when they call to the values of Ubuntu. Instead, this should be the driving force for political and economic development. Africa needs a vast industrialization and creation of market for her produces. Africa has all that she needs. Why is it that after 60 years of independence, Africa still exports her proceeds as raw materials to marketplaces where prices are determined by powerful countries or by powerful corporations? We know that an economy to balance has to have a balance of exports and imports, but that has been the undoing part of Africa. They say Africa's population consists of the young. The majority of the Africans are young. Therefore, there is already human capital. Therefore, the project of industrialization is inevitable. The question is, where will the money come from? Africa is so rich. If billions of dollars that are being shipped off to Europe are to be utilized and injected in the industrialization project, it can really come to fruition. It can be actualized. Africa has to intensify her fight against corruption, because corruption has been the great beast the great animal that has been eating up the continent. Let the laws that have been made be there to be enforced. Anyone who goes against the laws, especially in terms of financial crimes, they really have to be taken seriously. Africa needs a good education, an education that will allow minds to be creative, that will allow minds to become innovative, that will allow minds, or that will train minds that are going to be pragmatic. An education that won't just teach people how to speak English and wait to be employed at the end of the day. Happy African Freedom Day to you.